Part 1. The arrival commander Marcus stood in the observation deck of the Titan station, staring out at the vast darkness of space. He had served in the human fleet for over 30 years, and he had built his entire reputation on one simple belief. Humans did not need anyone. They were strong enough to survive on their own, clever enough to solve their own problems, and brave enough to face any challenge without outside help. The other commanders respected him for this philosophy. They followed his lead in all diplomatic negotiations, always making sure that humanity maintained complete independence. Marcus had turned down countless offers from other alien civilizations. Trade agreements, technology exchanges, military alliances, all of them were rejected with the same firm response. Humans did not need them. His crew had grown to believe the same way. They were proud people who took on dangerous missions that other species would not even attempt. When others offered assistance, Marcus and his team always refused. This pride had earned them respect throughout the galaxy, but it had also earned them a reputation for being difficult and stubborn. On this particular day, news came through the communication system that an elf delegation was arriving at the station. Marcus felt a slight annoyance at the announcement. Elves were known for their mystical abilities and their strange connection to nature. They lived on distant planets where humans rarely ventured. The idea of meeting with them seemed pointless to Marcus. He walked through the station corridors, watching his crew go about their duties. Humans moved with purpose and efficiency. Engineers worked on repairs, security personnel patrolled the halls, and scientists studied data from their latest missions. Everyone knew their job and did it well without needing help from anyone. When the elf delegation arrived, they entered through the main docking bay. Marcus stood with several senior officers to greet them. He wore his dress uniform, the deep blue of the human fleet, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his own people. The first thing Marcus noticed was the woman. She had long silver hair that seemed to shimmer with its own light. Her ears were pointed and elegant, and her face was beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. Her name was Lyra, and she was a dragon rider from the outer colonies. She wore flowing clothes made from fabric that looked like it was woven from starlight itself. But what truly captured everyone's attention were the dragons. Outside the viewport that opened onto the docking bay, two enormous creatures hovered in the void of space. They were nothing like anything Marcus had ever seen before. The first dragon was scaled in deep emerald green with accents of bright gold along its wings and back. The second dragon was slightly larger, with scales that shimmered between dark purple and midnight blue, with silver markings that looked like they had been painted by an artist. Both dragons were impossibly large, each one easily the size of a human shuttle. Their wings stretched out with an elegance that seemed impossible for creatures so massive. When they moved with perfect control and grace. Their eyes were aware and intelligent, tracking every movement both inside the station and outside in space. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest as he looked at those dragons. He had seen many incredible things in his years commanding the Titan, but this was different. These creatures possessed a kind of power that was both beautiful and terrifying. Lyra approached Marcus with a calm smile on her face. She extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting, and Marcus shook it. Her grip was firm and her skin was cool to the touch. She told him that she had traveled far to meet with him and the human fleet. She explained that she brought greetings from the elder councils of her people. Marcus responded in his typical manner. He told her that humans appreciated the gesture, but they had no need for alliances or partnerships with other civilizations. He explained that humanity had thrived by relying only on themselves. He said this with pride, believing every word. He told her that humans were strong enough to face any challenge without outside assistance. Lyra listened to all of this without interrupting. When Marcus finished speaking, she simply smiled that same calm smile. She did not argue with him or try to convince him otherwise. Instead, she asked him a question. She asked if he would be willing to see what she and her dragons could do. Before Marcus could answer, an alarm suddenly blared through the station. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors and the communication system crackled to life. A voice announced urgently that a large asteroid field had appeared directly in the path of the station. The rocks were moving fast and they would reach the station in less than 5 minutes. The crew had not detected them until now because they had been hidden behind a solar flare. Marcus immediately moved to the control center. His crew sprang into action, running calculations and trying to determine if they could move the station out of the way. The situation looked bad. The asteroid field was too large and they did not have enough time to escape. The crew worked frantically, but Marcus could see the worry in their faces. Then Lyra turned to look out at her dragons. She made a gesture with her hand and both creatures suddenly moved with incredible speed. They shot toward the asteroid field like arrows fired from invisible bows. Their movements were precise and controlled, nothing like the wild thrashing that Marcus might have expected from such large creatures. The emerald dragon used its massive claws to push aside the smaller asteroids, clearing a path. The purple and silver dragon opened its mouth and a beam of pure energy shot out, vaporizing the larger rocks into harmless dust. The dragons worked together in perfect harmony, moving like they were controlled by a single mind rather than two separate creatures. In less than 3 minutes, the dragons had cleared a safe corridor directly through the asteroid field. The crew of the Titan watched in amazement as the dragons returned to their position outside the viewport, their scales still glowing faintly from the energy they had expended. Marcus found himself staring at Lyra with new eyes. His belief that humans needed no one had just been challenged in a way he could not ignore. The woman stood calmly beside him, and when she looked at him, she smiled that knowing smile once again. She told him quietly that perhaps they had more to discuss than he had thought. Perhaps his belief that humans did not need anyone was not as absolute as he believed. Perhaps it was time for him to see that strength and pride were not the same thing as wisdom and foresight. Part 2. The understanding after the asteroid incident. Marcus found it difficult to maintain his usual confidence. He had always believed that humans could handle any crisis that arose, and for the most part, this had been true. But the dragons had solved a problem in 3 minutes that his crew might have struggled with for hours. The thought bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He invited Lyra to stay aboard the station for a few days so they could discuss potential cooperation between their peoples. Lyra accepted the invitation with grace, and she brought her dragons with her. The two massive creatures were given a landing bay of their own, a space large enough for them to rest comfortably. The crew of the Titan reacted to the dragons with a mixture of fear and wonder. Some of the younger soldiers kept their distance, uncertain how to behave around such powerful beings. Others, particularly the engineers and scientists, were fascinated. They wanted to understand how the dragons could survive in the vacuum of space, how they could move so quickly, and how they produced that incredible beam of energy. Lyra spent her first full day on the station exploring its corridors and meeting the crew members. She showed genuine interest in how humans worked and how they maintained their civilization so far from their home planet. She asked questions about the daily lives of the crew, about their families, about what made them want to serve in the fleet. Marcus found himself assigned to show her around. His officers thought it would be good for him to spend time with the elf ambassador. At first, Marcus felt uncomfortable with the assignment. He did not like the idea of being forced into social situations when there was work to do. But as the day progressed, he found himself genuinely enjoying Lyra's company. She was intelligent and kind. She had a way of listening that made people feel important and heard. Unlike many diplomats Marcus had met, she did not constantly try to promote her own agenda. She simply seemed interested in understanding humanity and the way humans thought. In the evening, Marcus took Lyra to the observation deck where he had first seen her. They stood together looking out at the stars, watching her dragons patrol the space around the station. The emerald dragon seemed to enjoy diving and rolling through space, while the silver and purple dragon flew in steady, methodical patterns. Lyra explained that her dragons were named Solace and Storm. Solace was the emerald dragon, playful and curious about the universe around her. Storm was the purple and silver dragon, more serious and protective by nature. Both dragons had been bonded to Lyra since they were hatchlings, and they could sense her emotions and thoughts across great distances. Marcus asked her how this was possible. How could a human and a dragon share thoughts and feelings? Lyra explained that it was not something that could be easily taught or learned. Dragons and elves had bonded together for thousands of years. The connection was something that grew naturally between them, built on trust and shared experiences. She told him stories about her world, about the mountain peaks where dragons made their nests, about the ancient forests where elves had lived in harmony with nature for ages beyond counting. She spoke of a time when her people had almost been destroyed by a terrible plague, And it was the dragons who had saved them by seeking out healing plants from the highest mountains. As she told these stories, Marcus realized something important. Lyra was not trying to make humans feel small or weak. She was sharing her history and her experiences because she wanted Marcus to understand where she came from. She wanted him to know that strength took many forms, and that pride in one's culture did not mean refusing to learn from others. The next morning, Marcus joined Lyra when she communicated with her dragons. She stood in the landing bay and she closed her eyes. For several moments nothing happened. Then the dragons became very still, their bodies relaxing in a way that suggested they were listening intently to something. When Lyra opened her eyes again, she told Marcus that Solace and Storm were happy that the station had suffered no permanent damage from the asteroid encounter. They had been concerned about the humans they had helped save. The dragons, it seemed, did not view their rescue as a matter of pride or superiority. They simply saw people in danger and acted to help. This simple statement struck Marcus deeply. The dragons did not help because they wanted credit or recognition. They helped because helping was the right thing to do. It was a concept that Marcus realized his entire philosophy had been missing. He began to understand that refusing help was not always a sign of strength. Sometimes it was just stubbornness. Sometimes it was fear dressed up as independence. He had spent so many years proving that humans did not need anyone that he had forgotten that having allies and partners was not weakness. That evening, Marcus made a decision. He asked Lyra if she would be willing to enter into a formal alliance between the human fleet and the elf colonies. He told her that humans still valued their independence and their self-sufficiency, but he also acknowledged that the universe was large and dangerous and it was foolish to face it completely alone. Lyra's smile was warm and genuine. She told him that this was all she had hoped for when she began her journey to meet him. She said that true strength came from knowing when to stand alone and when to stand with others. An alliance between humans and elves, humans and dragons, could make both people stronger than either could be apart. As they shook hands to seal their agreement, Marcus felt the weight of his old beliefs lift from his shoulders. He had been wrong for so long, but admitting it did not make him feel weak. Instead, it made him feel liberated. He was ready to see the universe in a new way, and he had Lyra and her dragons to thank for showing him how. Part 3. Growing Bonds. The days following the alliance agreement were filled with activity and excitement. The crew of the Titan began to work closely with Lyra and her dragons. Engineers studied the physical makeup of the dragons to understand their incredible abilities. Scientists ran tests to see if they could understand the energy beams that Storm and Solace produced. Soldiers began training exercises with the dragons, learning how to coordinate their movements with the powerful creatures. But while all of this was happening, something unexpected was developing between Marcus and Lyra. It started small, with long conversations that extended into the late hours of the night. Marcus found himself looking forward to these moments when he could sit with Lyra and talk about everything from philosophy to the nature of leadership. Lyra told Marcus about her family. She came from a long line of dragon riders, and she was expected to continue that tradition. Her mother had ridden with a dragon named Silverwind for over 50 years before she passed the responsibility to Lyra. Her father had died many years ago in an accident during a dangerous mountain rescue mission. These stories revealed to Marcus that Lyra understood loss and duty in ways that his own people sometimes did not. Marcus, in turn, told Lyra about his life. He had grown up on Earth in a military family. His father and grandfather had both served in the fleet, and he had always known that his path would lead him to space. But this single focus on duty had left him with little time for personal relationships. He had never married, never had children, and he had few close friends outside of his military colleagues. As he spoke these words to Lyra, Marcus realized how lonely his life had been. He had filled it with work and duty, telling himself that this was what it meant to be strong and independent. But watching Lyra with her dragons, seeing the joy and fulfillment in her face, he understood that he had been missing something essential. One evening, as they stood once again in the observation deck, Lyra turned to Marcus and asked him a personal question. She asked if he had ever thought about what his life might be like after his military service ended. She asked if he had dreams that had nothing to do with commanding a station or leading a crew. Marcus struggled to answer. He had never really thought about such things. His identity was completely wrapped up in his role as a commander. Without the fleet, without his duty, he was not sure who he would be. Lyra smiled gently and told him that perhaps this was something they could explore together. She told him that her time aboard the Titan was coming to an end soon. She would need to return to her homeworld to report to the Elder Councils about the Human Alliance, but she said that she did not want to leave things as they were. She wanted something more to develop between them. Marcus felt his heart racing as he listened to her words. He wanted this too, but he was afraid. He was afraid of being vulnerable, of admitting that he needed someone in his life. For so long he had told himself that needing anyone was weakness. Now, looking at Lyra, he realized that this philosophy had been keeping him from happiness. He told her that he wanted to try. He wanted to see if what was growing between them could become something real and lasting. He asked if she would be willing to visit the Titan again, and if perhaps he could also travel to her homeworld someday. Lyra reached out and took his hand. She told him that she had been hoping he would say these things. She told him that her journey to find him had not been a diplomatic mission alone. The Elder Councils had heard stories of a human commander who was so proud and so stubborn that he refused all offers of alliance. They had wondered if he could ever be reached, if he could ever understand that the universe was meant to be shared with others. But more than that, Lyra admitted she had felt drawn to Marcus from the moment she heard about him. When she finally met him in person, she knew why. He was a man of strong principles and deep honor. Beneath his stubborn pride, there was a kind heart and a brilliant mind. She had come to the Titan hoping not just for an alliance, but for a chance to know him better. Over the next few days, Marcus and Lyra spent more time together. They talked about their dreams for the future, about what kind of relationship they wanted to build. They discussed the possibility of permanent cooperation between humans and elves, not just military alliances, but cultural exchanges and genuine friendships. The crew of the Titan began to notice the change in their commander. Marcus seemed lighter, happier. He smiled more often, and there was a warmth in his voice when he spoke about the future. Some of the officers made quiet jokes about their strong, independent commander falling for an elf woman and her dragons, but even they had to admit that Marcus seemed more complete than he ever had before. Solace and Storm appeared to approve of the relationship as well. The dragons would often position themselves near Marcus when Lyra was present, as if standing guard. Sometimes when Marcus and Lyra were sitting together, Solace would fly past the viewport and perform aerial tricks that seemed designed to make them both laugh. One evening, Marcus surprised Lyra with a gift. He had worked with the station's artisans to create something special. It was a sculpture made from a rare metal found on the outer asteroids. The sculpture depicted two dragons and an elf rider, and it captured the grace and beauty of Lyra's bond with her creatures. When Lyra saw the sculpture, she was moved to tears. She told Marcus that she wanted to bring it to her home world, where it would hang in the Great Hall of the Dragon Rider Council. She said that it would remind her people that humans were capable of understanding and appreciating beauty, not just creating weapons and flying ships. Marcus pulled her close, and they stood together looking at the sculpture. He realized in that moment that his old belief about humans not needing anyone was not just wrong, it was painfully incomplete. What he had needed all along was connection, understanding, and the chance to share his life with someone who truly saw him and valued him. He told Lyra that he loved her, and she told him the same thing. It was a moment of pure happiness, standing in the observation deck with the stars shining around them and the sound of dragons singing in the vacuum of space. Part 4. The test. A week after Marcus declared his love for Lyra, a crisis emerged that would test everything they had built together. A distress signal came through from a human colony on the planet Meridian 7. The colony had been attacked by a hostile alien species known as the Krell, raiders who destroyed settlements and took valuable resources. The colony had approximately 3,000 people, and they were under siege. They could hold out for perhaps 2 more days before their defenses were breached. The nearest human fleet ships were stationed 3 days away. It was clear that if help did not arrive soon, everyone in the colony would die. Marcus immediately began preparations to launch a rescue mission. He knew that going after the Krell directly would be risky. The enemy had superior firepower, and his crew would be taking on a desperate fight. But he could not simply abandon colonists who needed help. It went against everything he believed about human responsibility and duty. Lyra approached him in his command center as he was reviewing the tactical situation. She asked if she and her dragons could join the mission. Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. He did not want to risk her or her dragons. The Krell were known to be vicious and unpredictable, and he could not bear the thought of something happening to Lyra because of his decision. But Lyra reminded him of something important. She reminded him that he had learned only days ago that refusing help because of pride was wrong. She told him that her dragons were warriors themselves, with abilities that could make the difference between success and failure. She said that if he truly believed in their alliance, then he had to trust her and her creatures to fight alongside humans. Marcus struggled with this logic. His emotions and his newfound philosophy were in conflict. He loved Lyra, and that love made him want to protect her to keep her safe. But his new understanding told him that treating her as if she needed protection, because she was not human, would be a betrayal of everything they had learned together. Finally, he agreed. Lyra and her dragons would join the rescue mission, but he also asked her to promise that she would not take unnecessary risks, that she would listen to his commands during the battle, and that she would keep herself safe so that they could have the future together that they were beginning to build. Lyra promised all of these things. She kissed him, and she told him that she would not do anything foolish. She told him that she wanted to live to see what their future would bring. The rescue fleet launched from the Titan station 2 hours later. Marcus commanded a large warship, and Lyra flew alongside in a smaller vessel that was equipped to work with the dragons. Storm and Solace flew in formation with the fleet, their massive forms casting shadows that seemed to darken the very space around them. The journey to Meridian 7 took 18 hours. During this time, Marcus and Lyra worked closely together to plan their strategy. They studied the scans of the Krell fleet that was attacking the colony. There were 7 large battle cruisers and dozens of smaller attack ships. The Krell had established a blockade around the planet, making it difficult for rescue ships to land. The plan they developed was bold and carried significant risk. The human ships would attack the Krell fleet head-on, drawing their attention and their firepower. While the enemy was focused on the human warships, Solace and Storm would use their speed and maneuverability to fly past the blockade and reach the planet. Once there, they would land near the colony and help evacuate as many colonists as possible. When they arrived at Meridian 7, the battle began immediately. The Krell ships opened fire with their weapons, and the human warships returned fire with everything they had. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as ships collided and weapons discharged. Marcus watched from his command center as his crew fought with skill and bravery. But he also watched Solace and Storm make their move. The dragons dove toward the planet with incredible speed, using the chaos of the battle as cover. The Krell ships tried to stop them, but the dragons were too fast and too agile to be hit by most of the incoming fire. One Krell blast came dangerously close to Solace, and Marcus felt his heart jump into his throat. But the dragon rolled through space with grace and speed, avoiding the attack. Storm used the distraction to breathe a burst of energy at a pursuing Krell fighter, vaporizing it instantly. The dragons reached the planet and landed near the colony. Through the communication system, Marcus heard Lyra's voice, calm and clear, directing the evacuation. She told the colonists to gather their most important belongings and move quickly. She said that they had limited time before the Krell noticed what was happening. The dragons and Lyra began loading people onto the smaller vessels that had accompanied them to the planet. The evacuations proceeded faster than anyone had expected. The colonists, seeing the massive dragons and hearing Lyra's confident voice, felt hope for the first time since the attack had begun. But then, disaster struck. A Krell battlecruiser broke through the human defense line and began descending toward the planet. If it reached the evacuation site, it could destroy everything in an instant. Marcus watched helplessly as the massive enemy ship dropped lower and lower in the planet's atmosphere. Then something incredible happened. Storm and Solace rose up from the planet's surface together, flying directly at the incoming Krell ship. The dragons released their energy attacks simultaneously, hitting the Krell cruiser with a combined blast that nobody had thought was possible. The dragons, it seemed, could combine their attacks when they were working in perfect harmony. The Krell ship's shields flared and buckled under the assault. It veered away from the planet and began to ascend back into space, damaged but not destroyed. However, it was damaged enough that it could no longer maintain formation with the rest of the Krell fleet. The human warships took advantage of this moment of confusion. They concentrated their firepower on the damaged cruiser and several of the smaller Krell ships. The enemy began to withdraw, realizing that they could not win this battle. The blockade weakened, and the remaining evacuation vessels rose from the planet with their precious cargo of surviving colonists. By the time the battle ended, all 3,000 colonists had been evacuated to safety. The human fleet had sustained damage and several ships had been destroyed, but no human lives had been lost. The rescue mission, which should have been impossible, had succeeded. When the evacuation was complete and the fleet began the journey back to the Titan station, Marcus made his way to meet Lyra. When he saw her, he held her close without saying anything. He did not need to speak. The look in his eyes told her everything that was in his heart. She had been right to insist on joining the mission. She and her dragons had made the difference, and they had done it not for glory or recognition, but because saving lives was the right thing to do. Part 5. A new beginning. When the fleet returned to the Titan station, they were greeted with celebration and honor. The crew had heard about the successful evacuation of Meridian 7, and they understood what it meant. Humans and elves, working together with dragons, had accomplished something that neither could have done alone. The 3,000 colonists were provided with temporary housing aboard the station and other nearby facilities. Medical teams worked to treat those who had been injured during the attack. Engineers began repairing the damaged ships. Everything returned to a state of organized activity, with humans and elves working side by side. But for Marcus and Lyra, this celebration and activity created a problem. They had spoken many times about wanting to build a future together, but with so much happening around them, they had found little time to discuss what that future would actually look like. One evening, Marcus requested that Lyra meet him in the observation deck. When she arrived, he was nervous in a way that surprised him. He had commanded armies and made decisions that affected millions of lives, but asking Lyra this question made his hands shake. He told her that he had spent his entire life believing in certain things. He believed in duty and independence and human strength. These beliefs had shaped every decision he made and every relationship he formed. But meeting her had changed him. She and her dragons had shown him that a different way of living was possible, a way that included partnership, trust, and love. He told her that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, not as a military commander working with a diplomatic ally, but as a man choosing to share his life with a woman he loved deeply. He asked her if she would marry him, if she would create a new kind of life that blended human and elf cultures. Lyra listened to every word, and when he finished speaking, she had tears running down her face. She told him that she had come to the Titan station hoping for an alliance, but what she had found was something far more valuable. She had found someone who could see beyond his own pride and his own fears. She had found a partner. She said yes. She would marry him. She would build a life with him that was unlike anything either of their peoples had ever experienced before. The wedding took place a month later aboard the Titan station. It was a celebration that blended human and elf traditions in beautiful and unexpected ways. The human crew wore their dress uniforms in shades of blue and silver. The elf representatives who had come to attend the ceremony wore flowing robes that seemed to glow in the light of the observation deck. Solace and Storm, dressed in ceremonial adornments made of jewels and precious metals, stood as witnesses to the union. The ceremony itself was unique. Half of it followed human traditions, with Marcus and Lyra exchanging vows in front of his crew and her people. The second half followed elf tradition, with Marcus and Lyra speaking a series of ancient words that Lyra taught him phonetically. These words were a promise to care for each other through all of life's challenges, just as dragons and elves had promised to care for one another for thousands of years. When it was time to seal the marriage, something magical happened. Solace and Storm began to sing. The dragons' voices created a harmonic sound that seemed to fill the entire observation deck and echo through the station. It was beautiful and moving, and everyone who heard it felt the weight and importance of the moment. After the ceremony, there was a celebration. Humans and elves ate food together, danced together, and shared stories about their cultures. The barriers that had separated the two peoples for so long seemed to dissolve in the shared joy and friendship that filled the station. In the months that followed, Marcus and Lyra settled into a new kind of life. Marcus maintained his position as commander of the Titan station, but with Lyra as his partner, the station took on a new character. It became not just a military outpost but a place of cultural exchange and cooperation. Elf scientists worked with human engineers. Human artists learned from elf musicians. Dragon riders flew alongside human pilots in joint training exercises. Lyra eventually decided to remain on the station permanently, though she made regular trips back to her home world to maintain her duties and responsibilities there. She and Marcus explored the possibility of other joint missions between humans and elves, and many of these proved to be incredibly successful. A year after their wedding, news came that Lyra was going to have a child. The pregnancy was unexpected and presented some challenges since no human had ever given birth to a child who would have both human and elf heritage. But Lyra and Marcus faced this challenge with the same approach that had defined their relationship. They sought help and knowledge from both human and elf physicians. They learned from both cultures how to prepare for this new life that would truly belong to both peoples. When the child was born, she was a daughter. She had her mother's pointed ears and silvery hair, but her father's darker eyes and human features. They named her Hope, because she represented what was possible when humans and elves chose to work together instead of remaining apart. In the quiet of the night after his daughter's birth, Marcus held her tiny form and looked out the viewport at Solace and Storm, flying their eternal patrol around the station. He thought about the man he had been before Lyra arrived. He thought about his stubborn belief that humans did not need anyone. He realized now that this belief had been incomplete. Humans did not need to be rescued by anyone. They did not need brides or outside help to survive or to accomplish great things. But humans did need connection. They needed to learn from others. They needed to love and be loved. His daughter would grow up in a world where humans and elves worked together, where dragons flew alongside ships built by human hands, where cooperation was seen as strength rather than weakness. She would inherit a universe that was more beautiful and full of possibility than the one he had fought so hard to defend when he was young and proud. As he held his daughter close and watched the stars drift past, Marcus whispered a quiet thank you to the silver-haired woman who had proven him wrong. She had shown him that true strength was not the ability to stand alone. True strength was the courage to open your heart to others and to build something greater together than you could ever build by yourself. The man who had once believed that humans did not need brides had been transformed by one elf, woman and her dragons, into someone who understood that the greatest victories were not won in battle, but in the moments when we choose to believe in something better, when we choose to trust, when we choose to love. And in that moment, holding his daughter under the stars, surrounded by the proof of what was possible when different peoples came together, Commander Marcus finally understood what it meant to truly be strong.